Hey, everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar podcast. All right, my pleasure to welcome back Richard Skinner of Local 12 Sports.com, Local12.com in Cincinnati, covering all things Cincinnati Bengals and the National Football League. How you doing, Skinny? How's your off-season going?
Going well, Mike. I actually got to toot my own horn here a little bit. A buddy of mine runs he runs golf pools for the majors, and thanks to the John Rahm back-to-back double bogeys down the stretch, I ended up tied for first in that, and got a few shekels out of it. So that's not too bad.
There is nothing wrong with getting a few shekels. You did not gain as many shekels as one Scotty Scheffler
That's
did.
a fact.
Rory McIlroy and Scotty Scheffler 1-2, winning the first two majors, the world's 1 and 2 ranked players winning the first two majors of the season. It's a good time for the PGA and for professional golf, I'd say. Wouldn't you?
Oh my gosh! Yeah. The U.S. Open's going to be the U.S. Open's in Oakmont, which is one of the great historic courses there ever was. It is going to be fabulous. Hopefully, Rory gets himself back on track because he was not himself in the PGA and looked a mess. But it'll be a crowded leaderboard, and it'll be all the names you know probably.
All right, let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. After all, that's what this podcast is all about. I guess we'll start with the schedule. Let's talk about, projecting the schedule and your impressions of the schedule. My two main takeaways were that there were two major stretches for the Bengals. First of all, the first 6 games of the season, in which 4 of which are on the road. And inside that 6-game stretch to begin the season, Skinny, you have a stretch of 4 straight games against playoff teams from a year before. You have Minnesota and Denver on the road, both of those teams playoff teams. Then you have a home game against the Detroit Lions, who were stunned by Washington in the first round, the divisional round of the playoffs last year in the NFC, but they wound up with one of the best records in the NFL, 15-2, and then you have after that at Green Bay. So that stretch is one that stands out. Then there's a 5-game stretch, and I know you made note of this in your story on Local12.com for the Bengals page on Local12.com. The 5-game stretch, 2 of which are against the Baltimore Ravens later in the season. Just break down what some of the takeaways you had from the schedule release last week for the Bengals.
For starters, the schedule's kind of a win for us as writers and those who cover the team. I mean, we get to go to Cleveland when the weather's nice. We get to go to Green Bay when the tundra's not frozen. We get to go to Minneapolis when it's not sub-zero temperature. We get to go to Miami when it's cold in December. So again, I look out for us a lot of times. So I thought it was a win for us. But to that point, so I broke it down into the easiest 3-game stretch, toughest 3-game stretch. And to your point, I actually made note of that early 4-game stretch because it really is a 4-game stretch. But that Baltimore at Buffalo, Baltimore at home, and actually at Baltimore on Thanksgiving starts it off, is just that's a meat grind. I mean, arguably outside of Kansas City, and if you want to put the Bengals in there, and you sure probably could, 2 best teams in the AFC other than that are Buffalo and Baltimore. You got to play them in a 3-game stretch. And oh, by the way, back to your earlier point, that 4-game stretch. Yeah, do I think Denver maybe backslides? Probably a little. Is Minnesota? You get them with a rookie quarterback, but they were also a 14-3 team last year. So that's a good team overall with Sam Darnold playing quarterback. That early 4-game stretch is a gauntlet. There are 2 real. Just you look at those stretches, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you survive those? To me, the Baltimore is the one that it popped off the page like you did that to them. And oh, by the way, Mike, Baltimore and the Bengals only have 4 primetime games. You can get into as many as 6. How about that second Baltimore game, a candidate to be flexed to primetime? That week's Monday night game is Miami at Pittsburgh. Well, those 2 teams could be a train wreck by that time of the year. Right. The Bengals and Baltimore could be playing, who knows, for maybe not only the division, but perhaps the 1 seed in the AFC. That's got a great chance. So you could go primetime Thanksgiving night at Baltimore, late afternoon at Buffalo, and then primetime potentially Monday night at home against Baltimore. That's a heck of a stretch.
One of the points I made for CLNSCincy.com, Skinny, was the fact that if the Bengals in those 9 games that we've just very quickly highlighted, if they could go 5-4,
Yep.
which I think is realistic. And then they go 6-2 in the rest of their schedule, which again I think is realistic. You're looking at 11-6. That's how I got to 11-6. I know you have the Bengals projected to go 11-6 as well, but when I look at those 9 games, that's the meat of the schedule.
No
And
question.
you're going to have somehow find a way to have a winning record, if you ask me, going into the season. Of course, these schedules never turn out the way
No.
we really think they are. But looking ahead down the road, and that's what we do. That was my takeaway.
Yeah, I always do it. I always put games when I do predictions, what I call the likely win category, the likely loss category, and the swing game category. And almost every year, Mike, I do this exercise. A likely win becomes a loss. A likely loss somehow becomes a win. It's interesting. Last year, 3 of the games that I had in the likely win category, which were New England at home, Washington at home, and Pittsburgh at home, turned into losses. And what ended up happening to the Bengals last year, I hadn't predicted at 12-5. Well, those 3 likely wins, I actually had 11-6. Those 3 likely wins that became losses. Look, I only bank on one of those becoming a loss. The 2 extra turned it into a 9-8 season. So to your point, and the way I do it, yeah, I mean, you get those swing games. You know, I have them having to go 4-3 in swing games, which I think they can. And yeah, I think to arrive at 11-6 is probably the way to go. I could be talked into 12-5. But to your point, like last year, I had the Washington game as a likely win. Well, I didn't know how good Jaden Daniels is going to be or that team, and that team ended up being a playoff team. Could that be J.J. McCarthy, right? I don't have that in the I actually have that in the swing game category, the Minnesota game. But you know, maybe he's great, maybe he's awful. And so those are the games that really, I think, determine stuff that we all do it. It's a great exercise to do. It's a fun exercise to do, but it's kind of futile because half the time by the you get to week 7, you don't have the same roster. They don't have the same roster. There's a different quarterback for that team, whatever. There's just different circumstances that come about. But it always feels like it kind of flows in the way you think it's going to flow from an overall standpoint, just not the way it flows when you try to map it out.
Okay, this is always dangerous. The last 3 years, the season openers have been home against Pittsburgh, at Cleveland, home against New England.
Yep.
In the offseason, we all figured those were likely wins. I'm sure you had all 3 of those games in likely win categories, no question. And the Bengals lost all 3 of those games for different reasons. I mean, the extra point that was missed against the Steelers toward the end of that game, Bengals wind up losing that game in overtime. And then the absolute no-show at Cleveland in the rain that Zach Taylor made frequent note of, the weather elements impacting that game in 2023 and last year may have been the most inexcusable game of all. Yes, Jamar Chase was distracted. I get that. And Joe Burrow was coming off his wrist injury. Totally understand that. You don't lose to the New England Patriots and Gerard Mayo in what turned out to be his only year in New England in the season opener at home. This year, you could be looking at Shedeur Sanders in week number 1. Do you think that's a possibility, by the way, Skinny?
I don't know. You know the old saying, Mike, when you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none?
None,
I'm going to
correct.
take this to when you have 5 quarterbacks, you absolutely have none. And they've got 5. Well, fifth, Deshaun Watson's the 5th, but you know my point there.
Sure.
That would be interesting if that was the case. That didn't even enter my mind. I thought they'd probably just lean on Joe Flacco because he's the vet and all of that. But that would be interesting because it would mean, I would tell you this, I think it would mean that Shedeur Sanders won the job, right? Which means he's probably playing well at that point.
Well, and if you're Cleveland, what do you have to lose at this point by starting the guy? I mean, you took him in the draft essentially as a flyer at the point of the draft that you took him, and it's kind of no risk. If you're the Browns, you might as well find out what you have. Who knows with the offensive line there? It's usually traditionally pretty good, but it hasn't been of late. And maybe find out what you have in Shedeur Sanders, throw the absolute unknown at a team that has had very much a lot of trouble handling the unknown, the Cincinnati Bengals, to start the season and see what happens. That would be my way of thinking.
Yeah, I'd love to see what he does in the preseason. I think it's going to be fascinating. That again, to that point, they're not going to give it to him. That would mean he wins the job, which would be kudos to him, and obviously he'd be playing well at that point.
By the way, another stretch that it's always dangerous to do this, Skinny, but you look at home against Pittsburgh on a Thursday night, then 10 days rest, home against the Jets, and then another week later, home against the Bears into the bye. you would like to think the Bengals could go 3-0 in that stretch.
That's the
Almost
easiest
never.
stretch. Yeah, I did a 3-game stretch. It's the easiest. That's the easy. There's no other easier stretch than that. I mean, 3 straight home games against teams. I mean, Pittsburgh could be having 41, soon to be 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. The Jets are a train wreck. I mean, Justin Fields is not going to be the answer. I do think the Bears are improved, but they're not improved enough, in my opinion, to go on the road and beat what you think is a playoff caliber or a championship caliber team in the Bengals. Yeah, that almost feels to me like a must-win 3-0 stretch, right? You go into the bye feeling good. You come off 3 home games after that early gauntlet of a schedule where, again, if you keep yourself above water, you feel like you've done the part, and then you come out of the bye week with with a game at Pittsburgh, and again, they're a mess, and then New England at home. You got a chance to make some hay right there in between the bye.
And then after the bye at Pittsburgh, home to New England, the Patriots will be vastly improved. Mike Vrabel, Drake May in what essentially will be his first full season, though obviously he got tested under fire last year. I think Drake May is going to be good. Stephon Diggs is pretty much his only wide receiving weapon, but I'm curious to see how improved the Patriots are by that stage of the season with Mike Vrabel as a head coach.
Yeah, I think they'll be better. But again, I think you got snuck up on last year, the mitigating factors of Burrow's wrist. I don't think they I honestly, I go into last year, not only the Jamar Chase distraction, but I don't think Burrow trusted his wrist at that point. I don't think they trusted Burrow's wrist at that point. I think that's why you saw so much dinking and dunking. That's what everybody was talking about after the game. I remember writing a column about it that, man, if this is the way it's going to be, this wrist is not right. And then after that point, he just kind of let it rip. But I don't think anybody really knew where that wrist was.
Talk about an interesting feature that you had on one Dante Barnett. And he is what is called, termed, an international pathway player. Why are the Cincinnati Bengals dipping their toes in that pool this year? And what kind of prospectus does Barnett have going forward for the Bengals?
He's an interesting cat. Jay Morrison and I were actually talking about him before we went in the locker room the day that we talked to him. And it was funny. I kind of wanted talking to each other about what we were going to write that day. I said, man, there's the dude from England's really interesting. He goes, I know. So we started talking about just how interesting he was. And then we went and talked to him. So this kid is from England, grew up a soccer fan. His dad was a big Man U fan. So he grew up that, but he kind of gravitated towards American football about age 14. And he admitted, he goes, I was kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, didn't know where things were going. I was getting in trouble. And he turned to football. And his dad passed away soon after he turned to football. And that made him dig his heels in a little bit more. He kind of found something that was a purpose in his life. And obviously there's not high school football over there. So we got into what's called the NFL Academy. And he spent 3 years in the NFL Academy where you play football, you travel, you play other teams around Europe, even over here in the States, and came to love it. And then coming out of the academy, he was trying to get into college. And he had offers from SMU, TCU, Houston, except for one problem. He didn't have grades. And so we ended up going to a small college in Pennsylvania, Dickinson College. It's a Division III school. But as you know, Mike, Division III schools don't give scholarships for athletics.
Nope.
So he had to pay tuition, and it turned out the tuition was way too much. Had to come back home to work, and he went back to the London area, a suburb of London, worked in the Jaguar Land Rover plant for a year. And then he found a way to somehow, at a coach who knew somebody that got him into the IPP, the International Pathway Program. And out of that program, you go for 10. He started that in January. You go for 10 to 12 weeks of football training, classroom training, football-wise, learning the game, going to that. He impressed enough there to get then you go to the IMG Academy in Florida. He did a pro day there and at USF, University of South Florida in Tampa, which is located close by, ran a 4.69 40. Now, he's a 6'1", 275-pound defensive tackle. Those dudes don't run 4.69 40s, right? They just don't. Does it mean he's a good football player? I don't know. All I've seen him do so far is stuff in T-shirts and shorts off to the side during the OTAs we've been to. But he's a fascinating prospect. When you see that kind of athleticism at that size, why not roll the dice on him, and we'll see what we get.
You know, I was talking last week with Jay Morrison about this, and it was interesting because if you're going to put an athlete like that anywhere on the field, to me, you put him in the trenches because he's not touching the ball. and he could really be, especially as a defensive player, Skinny, you know this, he could be disruptive.
Yes.
And he has athleticism and quickness and strength and size to be very disruptive. I don't know if he's a three tech. I don't even know if the
Right.
Bengals know if he's a three
Right.
tech or a
Correct.
zero at this point. But it's fascinating to get a hold of an athlete like that, be able to teach him. Jerry Montgomery's going to be able to get his hands on him like he did during the rookie mini camp on that couple Fridays ago, and see what they have with him. You know, to me, obviously, this screams practice squad
Sure.
Candidate, and
at best.
And what we do is we remind fans watching this right now that the flexibility this gives the Bengals is they can keep 91 players through training camp and through the preseason. And then when they make a cut, and if he clears waivers, just like any other player that was on the roster, they can keep him on sign him to the practice squad, but they can keep him as a 17th player on the practice squad, and they don't have to cut somebody else.
Yeah, as an IPP player, that technically doesn't count. So yeah, you get that extra roster bonus. I'm just fascinated to see if it works out. I mean, the other part too, it feels like this is not only important to him, like this is almost urgent to him. I think the last international pathway player the Bengals had was Moritz Bowringer, a tight end, who was kind of a hybrid wide receiver tight end. I never thought he was hungry for football. And I remember the famous Marvin Lewis quote. We still use it all the time, where somebody asked about Mo one day in a press conference, and he said point blank, NFL football, which of course means National Football League football, NFL football isn't for everybody. And at that point, you're like, oh, he doesn't like Mo. He doesn't even think highly of Mo. And Mo really never stood out. Again, maybe this kid's overmatched. I don't know. I just know the athleticism and traits are there. See Shamar Stewart. The athleticism and traits are there to at least take a look and kick the tires. And like I said, just talking to him, you can tell how hungry he is to try to make this work. And I think that's important too. I mean, you can't teach motor.
All right. Well, you provided a perfect segue, Skinny, as you often do. Shamar Stewart, the other 5 rookie draft picks, and the other 13 first-year rookie undrafted free agents that are joining the veterans. OTAs begin this week. What are some of the storylines, and what about Shamar Stewart? Do you think he, is more than just paying attention in the classroom?
I think that's all he can do. That's all he is doing right now. They haven't signed him. He hasn't signed. The sticking point is over roster bonuses. I don't understand why it's a sticking point. Listen, I know we're going to talk Trey Hendrickson here in a minute, and we can debate both sides of that, of who's right, who's wrong. I'm not sure either side is in that case, but we'll get to it. In this case, listen. Rookie contracts basically, especially for first rounders, end up being guaranteed all of it. Like literally, he's slotted to make $18.8 million, Mike. He's going to be guaranteed all of that. What difference does it make when he gets that money? Why would you make that a sticking point if you're the Bengals? How hard is it to get this guy signed? You remember, Mike, when we talked to at the Combine talking to Al Golden, this quote stuck out to me where he said, I'm using every OTA minute possible to get our guys up to speed, to be ready for training camp, to hit the ground running, to avoid, he was talking about the slow starts are a thing, whether, there's mitigating circumstances, but they're a thing. Under Zach Taylor, they're a thing. And Al's trying to avoid that. And he mentioned how important OTAs are. Well, so far, all your guy has done is stood there and watched and gotten mental reps. And he's supposed to be I don't know how vital of a part, but you would think an important part of whatever pass rush scheme, defensive scheme you come up with. That's why you drafted him in the first round. And he's standing there watching. And I'm not blaming the kid. If you're not getting the roster bonuses you feel like you deserve to have some peace of mind, I'm not saying, you remember the days he said, I'm not signing those papers. I thought I'm not signing those papers. I don't blame you. This one to me for the Bengals is confounding that you can't get it. Because again, it's not like you're trying to backload base salary into year 4 that you can get out from under, right? Almost every first round rookie contract is fully guaranteed to pay the full amount. Now you're slotted. You know that. I'm just telling fans. Right. Like first round pick the first pick gets like 46 mil Cam Ward, and it trickles down from there. The slot for Shamar Stewart's 18.8 mil. You know that's the goalpost. There's not even negotiation here. What is the holdup?
Well, based on the amount of reading that I've done on the subject, you don't have to pay all of that money at once.
Correct. But you're going to pay it.
I understand. And there has to be something, and we're not going to hear this from the Browns and Blackburns. I get that. But there has to, I don't know if it's cash flow. I don't know if they want to hold on to a couple of $100,000 for as long as possible to make interest on that.
Well, that's
I
cheap.
don't. Well, I mean, I hate to say consider the source, but consider the source.
Fair. That's a fair point.
And they know that they're going to have to pay him eventually. I mean, why draft him if you're not going to?
Correct.
Okay,
And
it's
again,
just confounding, and we don't have the answers. We're speculating here. Go ahead.
no, understood. But this to me, and again, and I in fairness, as we're doing this podcast, I haven't looked lately, Mike. I think as of a few days ago, only 12 of the first round draft picks have been signed. Maybe there might be more than that at this point. I'm spitballing a little bit there, but it's not all. It's not like the Bengals are the last team to not have their first round draft pick signed. But it's just asinine to me that teams, again, you're not haggling over, I want to make 30 mil. No, we're going to offer you 16. You know the exact amount you're going to pay the guy. Right. This should be so cut and dry that you go, okay, yeah, we'll give you a little bit more here. You'll make a little bit less back there. It's just insane to me.
So explain to me why Demetrius Knight Jr. is not signed.
I think it's the same situation. He's not slotted, but I think I think he wants peace of mind. Now he is participating. If I'm him, I'm not participating until I sign the damn thing, man.
Right.
I just wouldn't do it. I get he's trying to get off on a good foot, and I think they slot him as a starter, and I'm going to guess that he feels like, all right, I'm going to roll the dice here, and I'll eventually get signed there. It's a great question too. Rookie deals used to be a huge. I mean, I can remember back in the '90s, Mike, when I was covering this team. They had 2-a-day practices, and the only thing you did in between 2-a-day practices was call agents and figure out where things stood. Well, nowadays agents don't take most of our calls because they're dealing with the national people, so I don't even mess with it any longer. But that used to be a thing because there was no slotting. There was literally
right.
Again, there was a big negotiation window for these guys, and the Bengals. That's where they got the reputation of being notoriously cheap, as it took them forever to get their first round picks signed a lot of times. Again, I just don't understand what the haggling is now. The slotting process seems really easy to me.
All right. Any other issues stand out about OTAs? I know Joe Burrow is expected to speak with us tomorrow
yep.
on Tuesday for the first time in the offseason. Anything else stick out to OTAs with you?
Well, we're going to get to it here in a second.
Yeah, we are. Besides the obvious dark cloud hanging over the Kettering Health practice fields.
I've made a run at Jermaine Burton a couple of times. He's politely declined. I think he's a fascinating potential redemption story. He seems like he's trying to do everything right. Remember, we saw him at the draft weekend. He was in the facility. Kelsey Conway from the Enquirer, chit-chatted him for a minute, and he said to her, I'm just trying to stay in the routine. It seems like he's trying really, really hard to make amends and understand that, listen, man, you got a good opportunity to make a living here and a good living playing the game that you've played your whole life, and you just about urinated it away. And, he seems to kind of be following at the feet of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I mean, those two guys, whatever anybody thinks about those two guys, right? Those two guys, right. Mike, they're two pros. Again, you can argue how they handle contract situations, all of those things, but those are two pros, man. They're prepared. Even Jamar, for the whole training camp sit-in, you can blame him for it if you want as a fan, and I don't blame you. And was he a little bit rusty in week one? Sure. But after week one, the man put together a Triple Crown season. That's not easy to do if you're not prepared. And so all you have to do, my guy, is follow their lead and just do what to quote Bill Murray from Stripes, do what I do and do what I say. I mean, it's not hard, man.
Oh, that's such a great movie. So let's get to Trey Hendrickson.
Yep.
We've all written about him. My column last week was the Brown family is not going to be intimidated by drama. They never have been. They don't care. That's just the way they do business. They're lawyers first. They're business people second. And some would argue they're football people third. All of which,
that's right.
Well, and they would tell you all three matter to them, but it's how the image of that franchise has always been projected. And with Trey Hendrickson, there's two sides to this story.
There is.
And let us not forget, if Trey Hendrickson didn't like the contract, he should not have signed in 2023 the way he did, what he signed. 1 year, kick the can down the road. At that time, he didn't want to go through the franchise tag process, which he told us last week at that 25-minute impromptu press conference on the practice fields. But at this point, what is it going to take for Trey Hendrickson to get on the field? We know what will take for that to happen, but what will it take for negotiations to finally get started towards a path?
I think they have been started, and I think that's where he thinks there's miscommunication. And again, I'm reading into this. I don't know this for a fact, and I'm fascinated in your opinion. This is so multi-layered, so we got a bunch of layers to get there. But let's go through this layer first. So he's talked about how there's been a lack of communication, right? That's a big sticking point with him.
Mm-hmm.
But has there been? Because if you go back to what Katie Blackburn said at the owners' meeting, and I'm paraphrasing, where she basically said, he needs to sign at a price that maybe he doesn't think he needs to sign at. That sounds to me like they've offered him an extension. They've offered him the financials of the extension. They've handed that slip of paper to him. He didn't like it. His camp didn't like it, and probably said, no, that's not what we want. At that point, the Bengals don't. Again, they probably should communicate back of that's our final offer, and maybe they have. Maybe that's what they say is, this is it, man. Take this extension or leave it. They haven't talked to him since, and obviously things escalated with the Zach Taylor text, which I presume he was made to do, Mike. I can't imagine.
As well.
I can't imagine he did that on his own, and I think it's a shame. And I think it's all honestly, I think it's bad form if they don't have the guts to send that text themselves and they make the coach send it and potentially drive a rift between the coach and the player. I think that's just bad form. Maybe Zach did say. I don't believe that.
Well,
so to me,
let me jump in here, Steve,
yeah,
really quick. The reason both of us believe that, and many other reporters on the beat believe that, is because Trey Hendrickson, during this impromptu press conference, went out of his way to say he loves Zach Taylor. He has a great relationship, still has a great relationship. Well, you don't say that about somebody that you think did that impromptu, did that on his own by his own volition. Trey Hendrickson probably believes the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
We do, that was coming from somewhere else, not Zach.
Yeah, so to pick up on that point, so that to me was the Bengals escalating it back to Trey to say, listen, if you don't come to minicamp, you're going to be fine. Just a reminder of that. And it's almost like our offer's on the table. We gave you this offer way back when. You're at the stage now where you either take this offer or leave it. And I think this is Trey being Nikita Khrushchev, and people, you can look it up, young kids, banging your foot on the podium, banging your shoe on the podium of trying to come through us to them of, hey, I'm not going to play. Really? Okay, that's fun to say in May. That's easy to say in May. That's easy for me to sit here with a hand of a 2-6-9 Jack Queen off-suited and look across knowing you got aces and going, I'll raise. And you're hoping the person blinks, and Mike Brown sitting with aces going, I'm good with what I've got. I mean, they're not going to blink, Mike. They're not.
They're not. They never have. That's what we both wrote last week, is if you know anything about the Brown-Blackburn family, they're not going to be pushed off their spot by some temper tantrum. And I'm overstating.
No, it was a temper tantrum. It was a temper tantrum. It was.
It was. He spoke in circles for most of that. Okay, I want to focus on what Paul Dehner asked him, and you know where I'm going with this. There's two different things Paul Dehner asked him. He asked him, would you hold out and not play? And I'm paraphrasing here. Trey Hendrickson said, I'll raise a hypothetical with a hypothetical. Will you play on this contract? No.
Yeah, that was the interesting part, because he talked initially on the whole, will you be at training camp or will you hold out? And that's where he said, well, I'll raise a hypothetical with a hypothetical. Then later, literally a point blank question of, will you play on the current contract? No. Well, then if you're not going to play the contract, you're not going to be at training camp. So I don't know why we talked in circles earlier with that. But again, that's so easy to say on May, whatever the heck day, May 8th. And when July, well, I wouldn't even go July. I could see the training camp hold in, much like Jamar. But when September 7th rolls around, Mike, and they play at Cleveland, and he's due roughly $16 million, we can argue whatever. Let's just say $1 million a game, basically, for game checks, right? Mm-hmm. You going to give that $1 million up that easily? Are you really? Are you? Come on now. He's not. Because here's the other thing. If he wants to get paid after this year, well, he has to go ball out. He's 30-something years old. Listen, I don't need him to, if I'm another team, or the Bengals even, I don't need him to have 17.5 sacks, but he can't have 6. He can't not play. I gotta see something to pay him.
People ask me this, and I say point blank, yes, I think a Trey Hendrickson deal of some sort will get done.
I do too.
And why is that?
Because it's the best offer he's got. Listen, why did he sign the extension 2 years ago? Why does anybody sign it? Because they want the peace of mind and security of knowing you're getting that money or whatever signing bonus money, right? And so for this case, he's not getting Max Crosby money. He's not getting Danielle Hunter money. And this is where I would say this. There's no question he's as good as those two guys. We can argue if he's as good as Myles Garrett. Well, I will tell you this: the last couple of years, he's been more productive than Myles Garrett. I don't know if he's as good or as whatever, but he's been more productive. So
different player, though.
Correct, no doubt. But I would say this: I understand the frustration of seeing where the market went and seeing what you're being paid and having frustration with that. But at the end of the day, why do you sign an extension? Because you want the peace of mind and security.
Right.
If they're going to offer me, and I'm just spitballing for clear sake, 2 years, let's just say 58 mil, whatever, 29 per, with 35 of that guaranteed, or hell, maybe all of it guaranteed. At that point, do you take the peace of mind, or do you do what Jamar Chase and T. Higgins did? You take out an insurance policy and you bet on yourself. I mean, Jamar Chase could have held out the year. He was never going to, in my opinion, but he could have made that uglier, and it could have kicked the can, and we would have been in a really messy spot. Instead, he said, you know what, I'm going to play. I'm going to bet on myself. And what did he do? He went out and got a Triple Crown year and became the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. Right. T. Higgins was never going to kick and stomp and not play on the franchise tag. He wasn't, but he could have. He could have done, and he bet on himself. And what ended up happening to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase? They both got paid whatever the perceived market value was for each of them. So, Trey, my suggestion would be either take the peace of mind and security of what they're offering at a lower rate than I'll admit you're probably worth, or just bet on yourself, man. Play this year out and go to free agency.
What's Joe Burrow going to say about this? Because he's no doubt going to be asked about it on Tuesday. What would be your prediction of Joe Burrow's response?
I'd like to see all my guys get paid what they're worth. I think that's the easy answer, in my opinion. He's made his point about Trey. I mean, when he talked earlier, he made a point about all the guys, right? He made a point about Jamar,
he made it
and T, and Mike Gesicki, even, and Trey. So he's made a point of he wants them all signed. But there's also a business point to this too, that he has to shut his mouth about that he's not privy to. That, listen, I don't think the Bengals should pay Trey Hendricks and Max Crosby money. Just because the Raiders were stupid or the Browns were stupid and paid exorbitant rates for those two players, and the Texans, to be honest with you, which I think is a pretty well-run organization, were stupid enough to pay Danielle Hunter $35 million, doesn't mean you have to be stupid too, just because the market dictates that. You put a worth on a player, you may be wrong. We can all probably now agree in hindsight they were wrong about the worth of Jesse Bates by tenfold. Okay, they made a mistake there. But just because other teams do stupid things doesn't mean you should too.
Anything else you're working on, Skinny?
No, I'm going on vacation on Wednesday, Mike. So I'm going to be at the Burrow Fest tomorrow, the practice tomorrow, write something off of that, and then I'm gone for a week, and I can't wait. I'll be honest with you.
You know what? I won't bother you to return to the podcast for a while. How's that? Is that a deal?
No, I'll be on anytime you want. I enjoy doing it with you. There's no doubt. I really do. I'm fascinated at the Burrow conference tomorrow. I'm fascinated because Zach's going to get asked about, did you send the text on your own? I'll be fascinated to hear his answer on that and about the Trey situation. So it's going to be a fascinating afternoon at Paycor Stadium.